BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all of your sports betting action. Baseball season is in full swing, and we're into the home stretch for NBA, NHL playoffs, and have more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting while the games are being played. With the largest selections of odds on everything from Major League Baseball, NHL, UFC, BetOnline remains the number one online source for all of your sports wagering information. In between games, just head on over to the BetOnline casino, and with all of the top Vegas-style games, including poker and live casino, BetOnline, the game starts here. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the draft edition of the Bleav in Bengal podcast. I'm your host, Solomon Wilcots, joined by our Cincinnati Bengals insider, Charlie Goldsmith. And Charlie, are you ready to go? I know you got some good nuggets to lay on us. How you doing today, my friend?
The draft prep is done. I wrapped up the day 3 safeties. I've got that all set, and they're all the puppies are in order.
Well, look, I want to start first by getting an update on Joe Burrow, because every time I turn around, Joe's hanging out in Hollywood. He's having a good time hanging out with Al Pacino. He's having a good time shooting his commercials, getting ready before he goes to OTAs. He's also out there having a good time going to Lakers games. Joey B is living the life, enjoying it a little bit, isn't he?
Well, this is by design, and this process was really kind of started and kicked off last offseason, where he decided he was going to make a big significant change. Burrow decided that he was going to enjoy in the offseason being a famous quarterback more. And part of that was, the wrist injury really weighed on him. All the injuries that he's dealt with really weighed on him. His laser focus.
That's right.
Not to say it's unsustainable, because, Burrow seemingly can do just about anything, but he plays football, and that's what he does for 4 or 5 or really 6 months a year, longer if they're deep into the playoffs. And he decided last year, I'm going to have, and this is a perfect thing, have a little more fun. And the Bengals coaches even viewed that as that's exactly what Burrow needed. And all of this is very welcome inside of the building as Burrow makes the rounds.
You know what? I'm happy for him. I grew up out in Los Angeles. Look, it's a great place to be during the winter time here in Cincinnati. If you go out west and you're in California, you're enjoying a good day on the beach, I think it really does help with establishing a wonderful peace of mind. If you ever wake up on the ocean or on the at a ski resort on the slopes, it has sort of the same effect, right? But it allows you to get some fresh air. It allows you to reinvigorate and recharge your battery to get ready for a long season. He had an incredible 2024 season. I know the win-loss record didn't show, but this guy had more 300-yard passing games than anyone else. He had multiple games with 300 yards and over 3 touchdown passes than anyone else. He was simply phenomenal. And so I think he should be allowed some time to breathe. Let's get started by getting ready for the NFL draft. I understand you were at the team's press conference. You heard Zach Taylor speak about the draft. First of all, what stood out to you when you heard him talk about just their mindset and their philosophy heading into this draft?
To me, the most interesting thing of the day was something that Duke Tobin said, which is that he isn't looking at the roster right now as one that needs a lot of impact day 1 starters. And to me, that came across as a big surprise, because they don't have set starters now at both guard spots. Defensive tackle is a massive work in progress, especially from a pass rush standpoint. Linebacker Jermaine Pratt's future is a wide open question. Safety, whether or not Geno Stone sticks in that starting will seem to me to be a question. But Duke Tobin said that they feel pretty set and they accomplished most of what they wanted to and set out to do in free agency. Now, you can look at this roster and say, Duke, there are a heck of a lot of holes. And, we tried to ask that question in a respectful way, but they've put their chips behind, Geno Stone and Oren Burks and Chris Jenkins and Jordan Battle, who are young guys, and Lucas Patrick at guard. This is the hand that they've dealt for themselves, and they are riding with it, even though it certainly doesn't look as balanced as last year's roster did.
Well, there are 2 schools of thoughts, right? The general manager and the head coach and the people who are speaking as they're heading into the draft, just days before they're making selections. The last thing they want to do is really drill down and tell you their area of focus so that other teams, right, can get a bead on where they're headed. So I could see them saying that, look, we've done a good job in free agency addressing major needs. We can go into this with the board wide open. We can go best player available. And then there are a lot of teams that will tell you that if you start chasing needs, you tend to sort of pigeonhole yourself and passing up players that can really help you maybe in other areas, but maybe it's okay to be overly talented at one area, right? It's okay to have multiple great players in your linebacker room or in your secondary or in your defensive line. It's okay. So I think it's okay to go chasing the players who are the best available as opposed to saying we've got to nail a player with need. I'm going to give you an example because I want you to kind of go down memory lane with me a little bit, Charlie. Let's go back to the 2018 draft. Cincinnati Bengals, they got the 12th overall pick. You remember they traded traded down. They took a guard from the Buffalo Bills, and they go from 12th to 21. They know they needed a center, and they were targeting Frank Ragnow. And so they're at 21. They think they can get the center at 21. They don't want to take him at 12. That's a little too high. And guess what happened at the 20th pick? One pick ahead of the Cincinnati Bengals, the Detroit Lions, they took Frank Ragnow. And you know what the Bengals did? Instead of taking the best player available, they drafted for need. They took the next center on the board, Billy Price. Do you think they learned something from that scenario, chasing a player of need as opposed to taking the best player available?
You would hope so. The problem this year is that the dissension in this year's class is premium position versus best player available. My favorite players for the Bengals, who I think would rank very highly on their board, include Malachi Starks, include Jahad Campbell, include Derek Harmon. Derek Harmon does play more of a premium position, and then guards Kelvin Banks and Tyler Booker. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the Bengals' recent draft history, they've drafted a lot of elite athletes at premium positions who would come in and expect to be playmakers right away. So that's not necessarily from a premium position standpoint as much of what you get in this year's draft. So balancing best player available versus position of need versus really the third critical thing is positional value. And your premium positions would be receiver, which they're fine at, tackle, which they're fine at, edge, a pass rushing defensive tackle, corner. That doesn't quite line up with the draft, so it makes you an interesting spot.
I'm going to say a few things about a few teams because there are certain teams around the league that you kind of know what they value when it comes to players. There's certain players that fit perfectly for, say, the Pittsburgh Steelers. And what comes to mind? Tough, physical, that blue collar sort of grimy mentality that fits well in a Pittsburgh Steelers locker room. And that doesn't matter who's coaching them, right? Because whether it's Chuck Noll, the Hall of Famer, whether it's Bill Cowher, the Hall of Famer, whether it's Mike Tomlin, you and I know their prototypes and the traits they look for in players. It's been constant for over 50 years. I think another team within the division, the Baltimore Ravens, you know kind of what they value, or even the New England Patriots, you know what they value: smart, football intelligence, and all those things, big, tough, and physical as well. There are certain organizations that you kind of know what they stand for. You kind of know what they're shopping for and what they're looking for and what players fit and what players don't fit. If I said to you, what are the prototypes? What are the traits that the Cincinnati Bengals under Zach Taylor, since he's become the coach, and with Duke Tobin making these selections, what are the prototypes? What are the traits they value when bringing players onto this team?
I can tell you exactly what, and I could spend 20 minutes telling you exactly what they value at running back, receiver, tight end, guard, tackle. But that's what this is so interesting about this year. They have a new defensive coordinator. And the other huge thing that Duke Tobin was stressing today was how they are now building this defense under Al Golden's vision. Al Golden has a very specific idea and framework of the types of players and the types of skill sets he feels like his defense needs. And of course, they're not going to tell us, well, yes, we would take a 240-pound linebacker who thrives ranging side. They're not going to lay out those archetypes right before the draft. That's what makes this draft so interesting and unique from a Bengals perspective is, like Marvin was here forever. Before Marvin, it was yeah, the coaches had input, but it was a lot of more Mike Brown.
Yeah.
Then Zach takes over, and all right, Zach and Luke kind of grow together from scratch. Well, now what you've got for the Bengals is half of a defense from the previous regime, half of trying to cobble together new young pieces, through the draft, and then a couple other kind of bridge guys that they brought in through free agency. But this is going to be a pivotal draft in learning what Al Golden's archetypes are. There's some things that I think I know, some things I'm pretty sure that I know about what he values at edge, what he values at corner, what he values at linebacker. But it doesn't matter until you put your money where your mouth is, and draft picks are money. And we're going to learn a lot about Al this week.
Look, this is a time in the last maybe 10 days or so leading up to the draft that players are coming in and visiting with the Cincinnati Bengals, who are coming through Paycor Stadium. They're in the building. What few names stand out for you that have come to visit? Sometimes players come in that you don't even think that they'll have an opportunity to draft. You expect them to be gone. But has there any names that have rung out that have came in on a visit that the Bengals coaching staff and front office have met with?
Yeah, the other side, the other answer to that question is that what the Bengals specifically look for 90, let's say, percent of the time, it's a rough estimate, are these football loving, team captain, big school, winning program, clean pedigree. But there are some exceptions. There are some guys that they want to learn more about, some guys they want to dive more into. And those evaluations through those interview settings can be absolutely pivotal in the Bengals getting comfortable and taking that type of guy. So, like,
that's right.
They met with Walter Nolan, who isn't as clean of a prospect as Derek Harmon. And maybe Harmon's come in too, but only some of these get reported. I think Nolan will be a very important interview, kind of picking what he's about. Nick Eamon-Warry is a guy who reportedly is coming to safety with an unbelievable skill set. And also he was a team captain, looks like a great pedigree, but from just the style of who he is as a player and how that fits into your defense because of the versatility, you kind of would want to know more about who the kid thinks he is as a player before you kind of project how you drop him in, because he could, drop in just about anywhere. They brought in a lot of offensive linemen, as you'd expect. They put those guys through the ringer from a pass protection standpoint. So that's what you'd expect there. Those are the guys that stand out notably, who the Bengals have brought in for visits in terms of what's been reported. And a lot of it goes unreported as well.
Yeah. And I can tell our viewers that a player like Walter Nolan, interior defensive lineman, Ole Miss, phenomenal quickness off the ball. This guy can get a push in the pocket. You imagine him playing on the interior. He is a pass rusher. He's a penetrator. Whether it's a run play or a pass play, he is fast and athletic to get up the field. I'm not going to compare him to Aaron Donald, but think about an Aaron Donald and how disruptive he was with his speed and quickness as an interior defensive lineman. When you have a player as an interior defensive lineman who can get up the field, who can get penetration, who has speed and athleticism to beat interior centers and guards, boy, that really does open things up on the edge for a Miles Murphy and a Trey Hendrickson. And he's one of those players. The reason why you want to bring him in, because you got to get to know him. If you're going to use picks on players, you got to, players are products, right? You're drafting them, but they're human beings. They're living, breathing entities with energy and personalities that you got to spend some time with them to kind of get to know them, how they learn, how they process information. I think that's very vitally important in today's game. That's how you know if you have a good fit or not, by the way. And Walter Nolan is certainly worth the price of admission. Nick Eamon-Warry is a guy that I call him a decathlete playing the safety position. He is a sort of like, remember Isaiah Simmons that came out of Clemson, and he never really panned out. He was the jack of all trades, master of none linebacker that could play a little bit safety, a little bit linebacker. He was a good run defender, good pass cover guy. He was supposed to be the secret weapon against some of these athletic tight ends. It never panned out. And he did not finish up his career. He's still in the league. He's with the New York Giants. They didn't, the Cardinals who drafted him didn't pick up a fifth-year option. He's now with the Giants. And it still remains to be seen what Isaiah Simmons will become. And so I think we have to be careful taking someone who's tremendously athletic, but yet we don't see the production follow at the collegiate level. And Nick Imawari was a good player, but if you think he was going to have these mind-boggling stats like he put up statistically at the combine, I think the two have to measure up. And that's why bringing him in, Charlie, I think is really, really important, right? To try to get an understanding of his football IQ, to try to get an understanding, is he really good at reading pass routes? Is he good at reading the flow of linemen on a run game or in blitz? When you're blitzing and you're sending him, is he good at working with the linebackers and interior and edge rushers at fitting in the pass rush? But only by sitting down and getting on the board and watching tape and sort of walking through some of the things that he has done and how he views the game. That's the only thing that's going to tell you that. But I do think he's worth the price of admission. But I do think there's going to have to be a real connection between his overall athletic ability, which you and I both know is off the chart, and getting his production on the field to match up. What say you?
This ties into the whole shebang, the whole kit and caboodle. Is can Al Golden recognize and identify, along with the Bengals scouting staff, players that fit Al Golden's vision and defense in a way where there's alignment, which there wasn't. You know, the Bengals, what's a good example? Drafted Zach Carter to rush the passer and then tried him as a run stopper for 3 years before cutting him. The Bengals drafted Dax Hill to be a safety, and then he played corner. The Bengals drafted Miles Osai, of course, Miles Murphy to be a pass rusher, and then they used him as a run stopper for most of the first 2 years of his career. So, and I could keep going down the list of a lot of these defensive picks. They drafted a lot of really good man corners, and then they played a lot of zone. Like, the lack of alignment between styles they draft and roles they translate into has been my biggest criticism of the Bengals over the last 2 seasons. And you got to do it. Especially with these versatile types of traits pieces that we're talking about. There has to be that type of alignment. That's what this whole thing comes down to with the front office, the coaching staff, Zach Taylor, Al Golden.
See, you just said something that we should really make our viewers aware of. I think the Cincinnati Bengals are very unique. I think the way they're set up is very unique. A lot of people talk about the short staff or smaller staff that they have in terms of their scouting department. But a lot of people don't know that the Bengals coaches, all right, position coaches, they also work as scouts in the offseason. They put on a different cap. You and I both know that. They're evaluating players at their position. They're giving draft grades. They're working just like the scouts are working. I want to hear more from you, this sort of hybrid role that the Bengals feel like their coaches should work as scouts, whereas other teams, it's kind of like this division of labor. The scout, the coach is coach, and the guys who are scouting are doing it all year round, 100% of the time. Whereas the coaches who scout, they've got a coach when it's important, and then when the season's over, they put away the whistle, and now they put on a different cap and dive into the deep end when everyone else has already started evaluating these players. They're asking the coaches to wear a different cap. How do you see that? Look, I think there's been times where it's worked for them really well, and I think there's been times where maybe it hasn't worked so well. And I'm not really big at nitpicking the way they do things. All I'm looking at is the outcomes, right? But, you get to see it. Just kind of wanted to get your thoughts and weigh in on their unique process and how they go about it.
The times where it worked the best was Al Golden recognizing, identifying, and pinpointing Logan Wilson and Akeem Davis-Gaither. That is the best draft identification and development story of the last several years. And Al's ability to do that, including what he did at Notre Dame, is probably a big reason why he's here. Now, there are misses and failures as well, and that's probably a part of the reason why they've made changes on the offensive line and on the defensive line with their coaching staff. It's something they've got to be critically better at, because that's how they've decided they're going to operate. And if they're not doing it well, they've shown that they'll cycle through coaches instead. But when it's done well, you see a perfect environment for Logan Wilson, a perfect environment for, say, Jamar Chase. And those examples, it doesn't get much better than that. Now, there have to be more, and the Bengals haven't had enough true hits in the draft over the last couple seasons. But certainly, Burrow's the perfect example for this, specifically, obviously that was through Zach, but it was a perfect environment built around and for Burrow that was ready to go from the minute they picked him because of how embedded Zach was through that process. And that goes throughout the coaching staff to your 7th round, safety that you take. And that helps. That certainly helps, especially with those late round picks, develop an identity, but only if you're aligned top to bottom about what these roles look like.
Look, and sometimes if the coach is making the decision on the player and the player doesn't work out and you've had a chance to coach him, I think the thinking at the top when Paul Brown was running the team and with Mike as well is that the coaches should be empowered and should not be forced to coach someone that maybe they didn't stand behind on draft day. And so they asked their coaches to be well invested in the drafting process because it's almost like, hey, it's your pick, so you have to wear it. If it doesn't work out, we're going to hold you accountable. I do think there's some of that at play here as well. I want to ask you this because I heard Zach in the press conference, his pre-draft press conference, when they asked him, what does he expect from the defense this year? He said a championship defense. And he didn't even blink, Charlie. So in order to achieve a championship defense, yes, they're going to have to draft a few game-changing players. But how much also does that mean guys like Cam Taylor-Britt, guys like Dax Hill, guys like DJ Turner, guys that they've drafted recently on the defensive side of the ball, McKinley Jackson and Chris Jenkins, these guys are going to have to really come into their own. 2025 is a year for young players on the Cincinnati Bengals defense to really just live up to the billing. They don't even have to overachieve. But if they all play like they're capable of, then I do think the Bengals defense is not that far off. What do you think?
A championship defense for the Cincinnati Bengals means a much, much different thing than a championship defense for the Philadelphia Eagles. And part of it is because the Bengals probably have the best offense in football. What this Bengals defense, or really what this Bengals season is all about, offense and defense and complementary football working together, is establishing more control of the game early on, playing with a game script that's in your control so you don't have to chuck the ball 15 times in the fourth quarter. So you're not 2-6 and your season's on the line and you feel like you've got to throw the ball 40 times a game, which happened several times last season. They got to a point in the season where they said, oh no, we're stuck. Burrow, bail us out. It was like they were down, 14-0 in the fourth quarter. I mean, that's where they're at in the season too. Their plan is to develop more control and change kind of the style and script that they have to play with. And the defense's role in that is get Burrow the ball a few more times. It's don't specifically struggle on the first drives and second drives. It's the theme last year was don't get run all over very, very early in games like they did last season. So let's set that as the bar. And if they do, it's a championship caliber team. And that means it's a championship caliber defense.
I do believe they have some championship quality players on defense. They just have to live up to it because they're highly drafted players, from Myles Murphy to Cam Taylor-Britt to Dax Hill to DJ Turner. I mean, the list goes on. These guys, I think, are very well capable of making plays. Now it's about coalescing, coming together, having great chemistry. All right, Charlie, that's going to do it for today. What else do you got, by the way?
I'm curious. I wanted to ask you about your draft experiences. I'm sure you've told the story about your draft party a million times. So here's the question I'm going to ask you. When you were an active player in the NFL, how much did you follow the draft? How much were you looking to see if they drafted someone at your position? And did they ever draft someone at your position?
They drafted someone at my position every year, which tells you they were never satisfied. But no, I never paid attention to it. I did pay attention to the draft as I was growing up. And, even when it wasn't televised, I would go get the Sports Illustrated to see who my favorite team selected. By the time I was drafted, my story was there were no cell phones. That's how old I am. In 87, there were no, there was a brick cell phone. It was this big. It was huge, right? But I didn't have one. I was a college kid. No, it wasn't an everyday occurrence to have a portable phone. And I remember my roommates in college in Boulder, Colorado didn't want to pay the bill. So I didn't even have a phone in my apartment. I shared the phone with a teammate of mine who lived across the hall from me. So I would help him pay his phone bill, and I would receive my calls at his apartment. If the phone rang, he answered it. He would just call. He would yell across the hall, "Solomon, you have the phone." I'd come over and have my conversations in his living room. And that's what happened when I got the call from the Cincinnati Bengals in '87. The first voice I heard was Dick LeBeau. Solomon Wilcots, this is Dick LeBeau. We're going to fly you in. You're going to be a good player for us. And it was just such a wonderful call to get. But that was my draft story. I think the biggest part of that is when I was at the Combine that year, I was roommates with the Bengals' second-round pick in the very same year, Eric Thomas. Now, we didn't know we would be drafted to the same team. It was in February of '87 that we were at the Combine. And then we shook hands, and I wished him all the best. He wished me all the best. And then in April, turns out we end up getting drafted to the same team. We end up becoming roommates for our first few years in the league, and we challenged each other. We worked hard every single day. We were starters by our second year in the league and end up going to a Super Bowl. So we were good enough to at least help change the fortunes to get us to a Super Bowl. At least that's our claim to fame. That's what we would like to be able to believe about ourselves. But it was a really good time. You and I both know it. Those were great times for Cincinnati Bengals fans. That's my draft story, and I'm sticking to it. By the way, what's your draft story, Charlie?
You know, it's funny. The Bengals could use a Solomon Wilcots, Eric Thomas tag team 1-2 punch in the draft this year. That's exactly what they could use. I don't know if you guys have any eligibility left.
No, don't. I don't. What's your draft story? What do you got?
I'm still waiting for the call. I remember I still miss the draft in the afternoons. That is my hottest draft take, that I still miss the draft in the afternoons.
Yeah. It's all in prime time now.
Yeah, I know.
It's all for entertainment.
And I get why.
Yeah, it's all in the evening. Got to stay up late to watch it. You're working I have a show to do the next morning, so I'm working all through the night, and I'm sure you are as well. We want to thank everyone for joining us. Hey, look, we're going to see you on the other side once the draft is over. And we'll weigh in and check in with you to get your thoughts on the Cincinnati Bengals 2025 draft. So don't forget to send in those emails. We want to thank you for joining us, everyone. Don't forget to tune in next time.